So ingesting, copying, referencing data. You can, of course, import data from different sources, bringing that in through a pipeline with a Dataflow Gen 2 with Spark notebooks. You can even mirror databases, and where you're basically just creating a copy of an existing external database, and you're creating a copy internally, and it just says whatever's over there, we also have a copy of it here. But you can also say, well, you know what, we don't want to have a complete copy of the data over here. We just need to be able to reference the outside data when we need it. That's what shortcuts are for. And I highly recommend using shortcuts when you've got external data that's large enough that you don't want to be importing it all the time. And that's going to be the case if you've got big data that's living outside of Fabric. You end up paying a lot of money to move data around between different providers. If you have everything inside Fabric, then you don't pay anything to move data between systems as long as it's all in the same region. But if you've got, say, Databricks externally, and you've got Fabric, and you're constantly moving data around between them, you'll start seeing that showing up on your bills. So it's better in those cases to use something like a shortcut where it's like, I'm only going to use that to access that data when it's absolutely necessary. So yeah, and then metadata mirroring is basically the same thing, where you're getting it looks like a mirror as far as locally, but what ends up happening when you go to query that table, it actually sends that query out to the external resource. So this talks about where you can put your shortcuts. Oh, by the way, this is not proprietary. This slide deck here. So if anybody wants it afterward, just let me know and I can hook you up. All right. So this is a thing that this part of the exam I found to be one of the more intensive parts when I was taking the exam. So want to pay close attention to this stuff. And this is one of the things where I think a lot of people who have been working in Power BI probably have not worked with KQL. You probably used things like the Visual Query Editor. You've probably written queries in SQL. You've definitely done stuff with DAX, but KQL is one of those things where it's like, yeah, this is a brand new language for a lot of people. Fortunately, I think of the query languages, KQL is actually one of the, when you're reading it, it actually is more intuitive than when you're reading a query that was written in, say, DAX or SQL, because it's much less verbose, and it uses the like pipes that you would see in something like a PowerShell command, where you have this piped into that, and you go in kind of in a row, and everything that comes out from the first thing goes into the second thing, comes out from the second thing, goes into the third thing, and it kind of like shapes and refines the data as it moves through that. So yeah, so keep in mind that your KQL is, you can't just use KQL all the time. It's usually just for when you're querying database data that's coming out of the event house, or KQL databases and query sets. But yeah, and I'm sure people here are probably already familiar with where you would use SQL and DAX for the other places. So just study up on KQL, and we'll get into a little more here as well. But okay, security and governance. How like you're going to want to know how the and this is actually something I think that you could probably get away with not memorizing, because of the fact that in the exam you can open up Microsoft Learn, and you can you can search and find out what are the admin, member, contributor, viewer permissions. This table exists in Microsoft Learn, so I think rather than memorize the whole thing, this could be just the question. It's like, okay, if that question comes up, just go look it up in Microsoft Learn. It's easy to find it, and then you can get the answer from there, rather than try to memorize this and risk getting it wrong. So, yep. Anyway, we'll continue. All right, so item permissions and sharing. So obviously, if you grant someone permission to an item specifically, they get access to that item at whatever access level you get. But if you've only granted them access to that item, but not to the workspace, then it really is confined just to that item. A lot of people will end up granting access to a workspace, and they don't realize that when you grant access to a workspace, it grants access to all the items inside that workspace, and it overrides any of your row level or object level security. So as soon as you give someone even viewer access, it completely nullifies any of the security mechanisms you would have in place. I find myself basically saying we're never going to give viewer access to anyone at a workspace level, because I think workspaces should be used for development purposes. And so if you need to show something to someone, give them create the app, the Power BI app, and then make a a viewer role that grants them access to whatever it is that's internally that you want someone to take a look at before you roll it out for everyone. So yeah, workspace apps with what they call audiences, I think is the better way to approach that. So, but yes, item permissions and just being aware of what happens when you grant someone access to an item and what that will entail in terms of what data they can access. Okay. Let's see what we here. Okay, yeah. So your security layers or the mechanisms that you're using to enforce security. So of course, we've had row level security in T-SQL for decades, right? So if you've got a SQL database in Fabric, you can of course set up row level security in there. And as long as the query that's coming in is actually being executed as the user that whose access you want to limit to just what they get to see, then that will work. The problem is a lot of times when you have a query executing against an analytics endpoint, what's happening is that it's being executed in the context of like a service account or something like that, which bypasses all that security stuff. So it's a really good idea if you're doing security in some other way other than your standard row level security that you do in the semantic model. If you're using OneLake security or you're using the SQL area, you want to make sure that you actually have some sort of testing account besides your own that you can log in and see do the rules that I've put in place actually take effect for that user, and say, okay, this user is in the security group. When I want to grant access to a certain subset of data to people who are in that security group, does that actually happen when I log in as that user? So that's like testing it out for yourself is really the only way to know for sure. I think maybe until you've been doing this for very, very long time. So all right. So this is another thing here. The idea of direct lake has been split recently. So it used to be that it was just one thing. Now there's direct lake on SQL and direct lake on OneLake. So direct lake on SQL does have the standard role of a security that can be applied through a database query. However, direct lake on OneLake basically connects as if it were a service account, and it bypasses that stuff. So keep that in mind if you're setting this up. That if you're setting up direct lake, and this is kind of a direct lake, I think, is a bit of an edge case anyway. Most of the time, people aren't going to need direct lake for things. You can usually just use import mode for almost everything in Power BI. Very few things I think need to use direct lake, but in the cases where you do, just be aware of the fact that there are these two different variants of direct lake, and that one is capable of enforcing row level security and the other is not. So be aware of that. So sensitivity labels and endorsement or promotion. So when you got these are two different things, but they're kind of related, I guess you could say. One is where sensitivity labels are you get to define how sensitive something is at the Microsoft Purview level, which does require that you have Microsoft Purview and information protection turned on. So if you don't have that enabled, sensitivity labels are not even going to be available to you in Fabric. So if you don't have that available and you want to be able to do things like if someone exports to Excel, if you want to make it so that they can't open that Excel file without being logged into the same work machine where they actually exported that, which is a great idea. You really if you want to prevent data exfiltration from your organization, say someone plugs in a thumb drive and they save that Excel file, they take it over to their personal laptop. If you've got sensitivity labels on it, they try to open up that file on their laptop, it's going to be garbage. It won't open for them. So that's enforced with encryption. So great idea to use that if you can, if it's available to you. Turn that on and protect all of your semantic models that that have sensitive data in them. So that's sensitivity labels. Endorsement is where someone in the organization says, okay, this data here has been vetted. We have someone who is a subject area expert who has looked at the semantic model and says, yes, all of the measures in here are returning the correct values for what they say that they're representing. So that's where you can say, okay, cool, we're going to promote this. So anyone who has access to write access to an item can mark it as promoted. But promoted basically just means, hey, I think this should be certified. Someone should promote this to the organization. In order for it to go full organization, for it to reach a wider audience besides just the audience that person who did the original development can do. It actually has to go through an admin to mark it as certified. So you can kind of use that as a pipeline. Say your developers are out there going, okay, cool. I think I've got this one that's set, ready to go. I'm going to try to get it promoted so that everyone in the organization can use it. I want to try to get it certified. I'll mark it as promoted, and then I'll go talk to a Fabric admin and ask them to take a look. And if they also agree, then they can mark it as certified. So, and then master data is, a similar sort of thing where, only Fabric admins can do that. All right, we'll continue here. Development lifecycle. So this gets into version control on your workspaces. In Fabric, it's possible to connect your workspace to a Git repository. And that Git repository can be in either Azure DevOps or it can be in github.com. So Azure DevOps allows you to set it up so that whoever is making the change in the workspace, when they go and they make a commit, which says, hey, I've changed something, I need to save that change, but I also want to make a note about what was changed and why. I go in and make a commit message, and I say what I did and why. When I make that commit and push it to the repo, it will actually show, with Azure DevOps, it will show who did it. Unfortunately, right now anyway, with the way that GitHub works, because GitHub was acquired by Microsoft, not originally developed by Microsoft, currently, when you hook up GitHub repository to a Fabric workspace, you basically have to set up a service account that does all the committing for you. So you get the commit message, but it looks like it was committed by this anonymous account. So within a team, if you've got more than a handful of people working on stuff, it's really difficult to tell who made what commit. So if you have the option and you're going like, which one should we use? We don't know. We don't have either of them right now. I suggest using Azure DevOps because it is a more mature product for use with Fabric workspace integration specifically. Obviously, GitHub has a lot of maturity for a lot of other things, but if you're only setting this up just for Git version control for your Fabric stuff, I think Azure DevOps is easier to work with. You also get 5 free licenses per org when you set up Azure DevOps. So if your team is 5 or fewer people, it doesn't cost you anything extra to set up an Azure DevOps org and get your repos synchronized that way. So, yep, there's conflict resolution built into the workspace integration as well. So if someone has made a change locally on their machine and then they've pushed that change up into the repository, say in Azure DevOps, someone else has been working on the same item, but they've been doing it directly in the workspace, and they try to push a change back to the repo, then it's going to say, hey, there's a conflict here. You can't make changes to the same item from 2 different places. And so fortunately, there's a way to do conflict resolution as well. It'll tell you which parts conflict, and so it's the maturity of this integration is so much better than it was even a year ago. So yeah. Certainly reach out to me if you have any questions about this stuff. This is probably the thing that I have the most experience in out of all this stuff. So, all right, deployment pipelines. So this is the thing where in Fabric and Power BI, it's been there for a long time. You have the ability to set up multiple workspaces that kind of serve the same, that contain the same content, but you've got them at various different stages of development maturity. You got maybe a dev, a test, and a production workspace, and you have them linked to each other so that when you're working and you're doing development, you're working in the dev workspace, and then you say, okay, I think this one's ready to be tested. Then you would deploy that thing from dev into test, and then you've got in the test workspace, you might have people who are considered more like business users who want to be able to look at something before it goes into production and say, yes, I approve these changes. Sometimes it's called user acceptance testing. So you would say, all right, cool. Susie, go ahead and look at what's in the testing workspace. I've deployed changes there. If you approve it, then I'll go ahead and push it into production. And so that's what a deployment pipeline in Fabric or Power BI does. They're sort of tricky, and they're really difficult to integrate with Git integration. So I'd recommend usually picking one or the other. If you need version control, like to be able to look at previous history of items, then it's better to do something like have your development workspace synchronized with like OneDrive or SharePoint, and then that way you've got at least version history and the ability to roll back to a previous version. But yeah, Git integration plus deployment pipelines can, at least the deployment pipelines in Fabric can be messy when you try to integrate them. One way that you can achieve a similar result, however, is to instead of using the native deployment pipelines that are in Fabric, you can have each branch in your repository can be linked to a separate workspace. So even though in Fabric, the workspaces don't know that they're part of a deployment pipeline, in the Git repository, you could have a dev branch and a prod branch. And then when you have your, when you're working on a specific feature, you branch off of dev, you create a new branch, like we call a feature branch. You do your development, you go, okay, great, this is ready to go. You submit a pull request, you and a peer in your team, you look at that pull request together, you do a code review, and okay, great, this is good to go. You merge those changes into dev, and then you run the changes in the dev branch in that workspace, make sure that they look good, and then from there you submit another pull request from dev into main or production. And then so each of those workspaces you have set so that it synchronizes to a different branch of the repository. You can tell when you do the Git integration setup, you can tell it to connect to a specific branch. And so that's the way I recommend doing it. It does take a bit more setup, and it does take coordination with your team. But if you set it up that way, it's a very stable way to do deployments, and it makes it less likely that you end up with situations where, oh, well, somehow this GUID got changed between this version and that version, and even though we're trying to push this happens to me more than I would like to admit with the deployment pipelines, where for some reason you got the item that has two items that have the exact same name that end up showing up in there, and the only reason is because somebody opened it in desktop one time as opposed to somebody opened it up in the workspace, and it gets messy. If you use Git integration for the whole thing, that eliminates that possibility. So see, I'm trying to make sure that we're doing okay on time. We're actually maybe even a little bit ahead. That's great. Okay, XMLA endpoint. This is a thing that's been around for a while in Power BI, where essentially you can connect to a semantic model through a protocol called XMLA. I think it's like XML for analytics, if I'm not mistaken. It's essentially a scripting language that says, okay, I'm connecting to this endpoint here. I'm gonna command for these changes to be made. It doesn't even have to be changes. It can also be a query. You can say I'm running a query, or I can request changes. I guess in a sense, it's almost like SQL, where you can query data, but you also make changes to the data. But this is specific to semantic models in Power BI. I think even back when it was just I'm dating myself here, but back when it was multidimensional models, I think you could run queries with an XMLA endpoint back then as well. But this is one of those things where you have to turn it on. It's not enabled by default. When you turn it on, you also have the option to make it read write or read only, and those settings are found in the capacity settings. So whatever capacity is assigned to the workspace, that capacity settings are what determine whether the items in that workspace can be modified by XMLA endpoint or only read by the XMLA endpoint. So keep that in mind when you're doing XMLA stuff, because the settings for that are not in the workspace at all. And if that's where you're looking, you're going to go, where the heck are these settings? They're in the capacity settings, which will require you to have access to the capacity. And if I'm not mistaken, capacity cannot be assigned, like administration cannot be assigned to groups, security groups. So it's like just people. For whatever reason, I wish that you could do security group assignment on everything, but Microsoft ain't perfect. So I'll keep going here. Reusable assets and tracing dependencies. So I think this is something I've talked about before. For those of you who attended the Data Dojo presentation I did a while ago, the idea that you've got an asset that you can share with your team that says, hey, we have a starting point for our reports. This is a template file. It has all of our standard themes in it. So like if you make a visual, it's going to have the right color scheme. It's going to have the right font, the right, if it's a table, it's going to have this specific type of formatting for that table. If it's a slicer, it's always going to be this type of slicer, that sort of thing. You can set all those defaults, and you can create a PBIT file or PBIT, and then you can share that with your team. You can even have inside the PBIT, you can have some basic data sources already configured. You can say, all right, well, we're going to have the connection to our standard database already in there, so that when someone opens it, the very first thing it says, okay, we're connecting to this data source. and then it just goes ahead and connects to that, and then so that they don't have to go, okay, which servers do I connect to? So you can have those template files ready to go for your team that way. Same thing goes for data sources, a PBIDS. You can distribute data sources as a file that way. And that way it's like, oh, we've got a dev server and we have a test server and we have a prod server. You can say, all right, well, we're just going to distribute a file for each of those things. And then when people are working locally, they can go, okay, well, I need to connect to the dev server. So I'm going to use the dev server data source file. So, and then you've got your lineage view and impact analysis. This is done in the workspace in Power BI. It would also tell you like, hey, when you're looking at a specific item, it'll tell you, hey, lineage says this is where this item gets its data from. And you can trace it back and you go, this report connects to this semantic model, which gets its data from this SQL database. So it's easy to see where something came from. Impact analysis is telling you, hey, if you delete this semantic model, here are the reports that are connected to it. So if you delete that semantic model, those reports are going to break. So it's a good way to tell when you're trying to clean things up whether you're going to ruin someone's day. How are we doing? Does anybody have questions so far?
There was one question in the chat. You were discussing
variable library fix the issue with the deployment pipelines. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I mean, there are multiple issues with deployment pipelines. The one that I described is not something that can be fixed with a variable library. And that's just a thing that happens where when you open a Power BI desktop file, if you are opening it as, like, you say you downloaded the file and you open it and then you push that, you publish that change into the workspace. If you do that and there was already the file there, you're basically overriding it and you're making a whole new set of GUIDs. And then the next time you try to deploy from that workspace to the next one, it's going to say, hey, this is a brand new file here. And you'll end up with two reports and semantic models with exactly the same name in the next workspace in the pipeline. That's just the way Microsoft does it for some reason. They don't use the name of the semantic model and report as the definitive answer of whether this is the same thing or not. They use the internal GUIDs that are in there. Those are randomly generated, so you don't have any control over whether it decides to generate new ones or use the existing ones. And it kind of, the behavior of that depends on how you got a hold of the file. If you downloaded it, use the download this file. That is usually a good sign that it's going to break that that lineage chain. So hopefully that made sense. But yeah, variable libraries are a great thing to have. It can help to allow you to have some flexibility when you are moving things from one place to another. Be able to say, yeah, I've got a data source that I want it to point to dev when it's here, and I want it to point to test over here, and I want it to point to prod over here. Deployment pipelines actually have a way to set that stuff that's not even in the variable library. That's been around since before variable libraries. They're I think they're called like actions or something like that, deployment actions, I think, where you can basically tell it to replace the parameter values. When you have a semantic model, you can put parameters and you can say, this semantic model, I want to be able to change a value in Power Query without having to open in desktop. That's what a parameter is. You can go in there and basically put your connection string for your SQL server. You can put that in as a parameter, and then when you're deploying from dev to test to prod, you can actually change that connection string at each stage along the way. And you can basically tell the workspace and the pipeline, hey, when you're moving from dev to test, change this parameter value from this to that. But that doesn't require variables or libraries to do that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question there. So hopefully, of course, we can certainly discuss that later if we need to. All right, how are we doing on time here? We're basically right on the dot. Okay, cool. Direct Lake. So this is kind of still referring back to what we were talking about earlier, how there's they've split the idea of Direct Lake into two different flavors: the SQL variant and the One Lake variant. So this kind of talks about the differences between them. I would just keep in mind that this is somewhat new. It's not super new, so I think it's probably going to be on the exam. Just be aware that that this is out there, and be like I said, I'm going to make the slide deck available, so if you want to get a hold of this, you can get a copy and study that up if you want. All right. So what a Direct Lake refresh actually does, right? So Direct Lake basically means instead of you importing data into the semantic model and having it store that data in memory. What Direct Lake is doing is it's saying, you know what, we're not going to store the data in the semantic model in memory. We're just going to have the semantic model know where it can go to get the data when someone's looking at the report. And it goes and queries the data from the OneLake location. Basically, it's stored in Delta tables. Now, Microsoft has done some really creative stuff to get Delta tables to act more to be more performant than a standard Delta table would normally be when you're querying it. If you were to normally just query a regular Delta table without the OneLake technology stack in there, it would be pretty darn slow. And it would be possibly even slower than querying a SQL server with direct query. And so those of you who've used direct query know that if you're trying to do something other than a very surgical select on a very specific subset of data, direct query is just garbage for performance. And so fortunately, Direct Lake has been tuned to where it can achieve similar performance to direct query, but you do still have to be very careful about how you're setting it up. So if you're having it going and make those queries directly, if you're just having it query enormous chunks of data where you're filling up a whole table and every single row in that table's got a measure calculated on it, you're going to be waiting minutes and minutes, possibly longer, for that table to render on the page. So just know that direct query, Direct Lake is more the kind of thing that you have to fall back to when your data is so big that you can't import it into the semantic model. And the only way you can actually get what you need is to do summarized data in the semantic model and then use a direct query for very specific things like a drill through, where it's like, I need to get data, specifics on a certain line of data in the summary and say, I want to see the how this summary breaks down. I want to see the individual rows that went into this summarization. Do a drill through, and then in the drill through visual, that can be powered by something like direct query, and that's where you can get reasonable performance out of that sort of thing. So keep in mind that is the case. What this is talking about here, what a Direct Lake refresh actually does, is it's not refreshing the data, because it doesn't store the data in the semantic model. But what it does do is it refreshes the metadata about the table. So if for instance, if the underlying table has had a new column added, refreshing this Direct Lake will say, oh yeah, there's a new column here now. Or if there's a column where its data type has changed, that's the kind of thing. That's what's called schema data, and that is considered metadata. And when you do a refresh in Direct Lake, that's what you're getting. All right. Semantic models in DAX. I think probably people who are attending this, hopefully you have enough background in semantic models in DAX that we don't really need to get too deep into this. One thing to know though is the idea of storage mode. And this is, again, getting back to the whole import versus direct query thing. So we already talked about import and direct query, but what the heck is dual? So here we go. Cached or direct query decided per query. Dimensions joined in a direct query fact to avoid a limited relationship. It's kind of difficult to describe this. I would recommend diving into the official docs on this if you really want to understand how it works. But this is, again, one of those, like, I've never actually seen dual used in reality. I think it's such a very niche case thing where it was probably one of those things where some Fortune 500 company was like, they absolutely needed something like this. And they basically pestered Microsoft and made them develop it. And then they came out with this feature. And ever since then, there have been, a handful of companies that really needed it. And they're super happy about it. But most places don't need it. This kind of thing is, can be a sign that, hey, things were set up a certain way back when they got all this set up, and there's just so much infrastructure that's built up this way. And now we know better, and we would design it differently if we were to make it now, but we kind of have to have something that allows us to work with what we've got. So I think there's a lot of that sort of thing that's built into certain features in Power BI. So, but yeah, this is the whole, like, this is not what it actually is. People think that dual means import with a direct query fallback. It's not that. And you cannot switch from import to direct query. It is the switch is one directional. If you start with direct query and you switch to import, you're stuck. If you want to go back, you have to delete that table, re-add it, and go back to direct query that way. So keep that in mind. All right, cool. Let's keep going. I see a few things coming here. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I've seen questions that you asked a lot about the difference between these. Is it safe to say that with live connection data directly, it's better, and with SQL servers, direct query would be your choice?
So that's going to be, I'm going to give you the consultant answer. It depends. If your SQL server is on-prem, there's going to be some latency between when you're connecting, when it connects, it goes basically over the internet and connects to your on-premises SQL server, and then it has to respond through the data gateway. So the latency that it takes to get the data going that way, that might actually hinder performance enough to where Direct Lake wins. But if your SQL server is in Fabric, like if it's a Fabric SQL database, which is a type of database that we talked about earlier, if it's in there, it's likely, I think, that just using that as your direct query source would probably be faster. Same thing if it's a warehouse, where if you do a direct query, it's connecting over T-SQL. The connection is essentially local. If it's going from Fabric to Fabric, and it's right there, they're in the same instance. It's almost as if you've got two servers that are sitting next to each other with a LAN cable connecting them to each other. So as opposed to there's one server that's here and there's another one that's on the opposite side of the world. So performance, you kind of have to just try the two and see which one works out better. And you can kind of infer that if there's, if you can do things from cloud to cloud, it's usually going to be better performance than if you're doing cloud to on-prem. But I do say usually there's nothing that guarantees that it's going to be better one way or the other. If your on-prem database is super well maintained, you've got a DBA who's just a wizard and it's got all the right indexes set up on everything. It could be that it's just like highly performant and just beats the pants off of the Direct Lake. So I think it's worth just doing some trial runs and seeing which ends up performing better if you have the option to do that. If you've got the data in both places. So
that makes sense. I was just saying, like, in reference to the exam, because I just saw a couple of exam questions where it seemed like they were just kind of driving that. It's one of those where it's like you have to drop down and then you have to choose direct query, direct lake, or deposit. And typically, I noticed like they wanted to ask for like live connection or something. Direct lake was the right choice, and then for something related to SQL, direct query. And then I multiple questions that kind of, again, just exactly that.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at that drop down menu, like which one do I choose? The safest option is always to do import if you can. That is always going to be the best performance, because what you're doing there is you're essentially front loading all of the work at refresh time. So as long as your data doesn't need to be real time, which I think I can count on one hand the number of organizations I've where real time data in reporting was actually required, where they couldn't wait until the next refresh cycle. And you can schedule refreshes to run every hour if you want. If it absolutely has to be, all the way up to the very second, then that's where you need direct query. If you can have it so that people are okay with, if your organization says, you know what, it's fine, we're doing analytics here, we're not trying to, we're not looking at, real time temperature figures for all the machines that are running on the floor out there, right? That's where you would need real time data. If you're doing stuff like, hey, what were yesterday's sales? Overnight refresh. There's no reason to do direct query for that, other than if the data is so huge that you just can't fit in your semantic model. In which case you would do again an aggregation that you do import, and then you would set up your the drill through so that it connects as a direct query, and then it does a direct query for just the very specific subset, and that will be relatively performant as long as you're doing a small selection. When it sends that direct query, it sends it with a very targeted where clause, and then that way it makes sure that it's not just saying select star from blah 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 blah. Download the whole thing. Make sense?
Yep, sure does. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Great question. All right. Oh wait, did we cover this? Oh yeah. All right. Relationships between tables, bridges, and what limited relationships cost. A limited relationship is going to happen where you've got data sources in your semantic model that are coming from different places. So if you've got if it's all locally in the same model, it's going to know that it can guarantee referential integrity between like basically referential integrity means that if you've got a value in one table, there will be a corresponding value in the other table, and we can guarantee that. If you've got data coming from different sources, in order to achieve referential integrity, to know for sure that every value here has a corresponding value in that other table there to establish the relationship, in order to do that, it would have to query the entire table, and normally you don't want to do that if you've got a direct query kind of relationship, or where you're pulling data from an external, say like it's if you're doing composite model where you've got tables that you're importing from another semantic model, you don't normally want to have to run a query across the entire column and make sure that every single value is there in both of them. So yeah. Cardinality, this is an interesting word because it can have two meanings. One means the X to X ness of it. So many to many, one to one, one to many, many to one, that kind of thing. That is oftentimes described as cardinality, and the filter direction in a semantic model often depends on what that looks like. So if you have a dimension connected to a fact table, you've got one row for each item in the dimension. Say we'll call it like category, right? One row for each category, and then you're connecting to a fact table where it's talking about multiple things that happened related to that category. So talk about a product dimension and a sales fact table. Every time you sell this box of Cheez-Its, you've got that, you have a link between that sales line, and you have the specific line in the dimension for that type of Cheez-It box. Well, multiple customers can buy that same box of Cheez-Its, and it will show up multiple times there. So you have a one-to-many relationship. And when you have a one-to-many relationship, the default is we're going to set up a directional relationship where the filter starts at the dimension and filters the fact table. By default, that relationship does not filter the other direction. If you were to select a specific line, sales line in the fact table, it doesn't counter filter the dimension table by default. Of course, you could set up a bidirectional relationship, but that can hinder performance. It can also make things kind of weird in terms of it may affect other calculations in your model in unexpected ways. So there are scenarios where you can't avoid bidirectional relationships. One example of that is a bridge table, where essentially this is actually really common to see if you're doing row level security and you want to set up a list of usernames and the things that they have access to. And you've got, here's the user table, and you filter the user table based on who's logged in, and you have that user table connected to this bridge table that says, here's what those users have access to. And then that bridge table has access to the actual data. You would need a bidirectional relationship between the first two, and then a single directional relationship from the bridge down to the fact table. So keep in mind that this all really kind of sort of mirrors. Sorry, not mirrors. It is. Sorry, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. So this is relating to limited relationship. We talked about that earlier, and I guess I've talked about a lot of stuff here that's not really represented on this slide. Certainly reach out to me if there's anything about what I was just talking about that doesn't make sense and that isn't explained here in the slide very well. How am I doing on time? All right, so a little bit. All right. Calculation groups, format strings, field parameters. Field parameters and calculation groups can achieve a lot of the same things. They're just done differently. Field parameters are basically a magic table type, where in that table you're creating sort of like a lookup, and then it allows you to switch around what fields are being displayed in a visual. So if you want to be able to say, I want to dynamically select which category or which dimension I'm slicing this fact table by. You could say, I want to see sales always, but I want to be able to change whether I'm looking at it by date or by location or by customer. You can have something like a field parameter set up so that it allows you to switch between those using a slicer. Pretty cool. Calculation groups is when you've got, say you've got a measure. It's like you have your total sales measure. You want to be able to see that same measure. You want to say, all right, well, I want to see year to date. I want to see year over year. I want to see compared to last month, so month over month, quarter over quarter. All those are basically variations of filter criteria that would be, or filter conditions that would be applied to that measure, rather than having to write sales quarter over quarter, sales year over year, sales week over week, month over month, blah, blah, blah. And I have a separate version of the measure for every one of those where almost all of it's the same and all you're doing is just changing the filter criteria. You can actually make it so that the measure is the base measure and you only have that one. And the calculation group basically it modifies the filter criteria based on whatever the calculation item is. So you can have your calculation group say, all right, we've got year over year, we've got quarter over quarter, we have month over month, week over week, all that stuff, year to date, right? All those things can be in there as calculation items. And then when you put the calculation group together with the measure, it automatically breaks out that single measure into all of those other things that you had specified. So, I'm sure some of you have probably seen a model where there was like 1,000 measures, and it's because they've got slight variations on every single one of them. They've got, say maybe 20 legitimate measures that they need, but they also have a copy of those measures for every single one of those, variations. And rather than doing it that way, you just keep your base measures and then you use the calculation groups to expand that out to achieve all of those sort of different perspectives, right? Field parameter in this case, not to be confused with adding a parameter. Oh, yeah. So field parameter is done completely in DAX. A parameter in a semantic model, if you just say parameter by itself, what that means is changing a value in Power Query, where you're saying, okay, I think I mentioned this earlier. This is the connection string. Say you're connected to a SQL server, and you've got server A or server B or server C in your organization. You want to be able to change which server that semantic model connects to without having to open it in Power BI Desktop. You can just go into the settings in the semantic model after it's been published and go just change that value in the settings. That's a parameter, because the next time it goes to refresh, it uses that. It basically takes that value and it plugs it into the Power Query at runtime and says, here, this is the server that we're connecting to this time. And then it goes and fetches the data from there. And so, do keep in mind the field parameter is DAX and parameter just means Power Query. So yeah, great job pointing that out. Thanks. Okay. Yep. Okay. And dynamic format strings is basically where you can tell it if the number is big enough for it to be billions, show it formatted with billion. If it's only big enough for it to show in millions, show it where it says millions. That sort of thing. So essentially, it looks at the actual value before it determines how to display it, how to format it in the display. So it's a very useful thing to have, because you don't want to have a column where you're looking at amounts and every single one of them has got because if you've got one where it's like, yeah, this one is $12 and that one was $12 billion, and you have them in the same table, you're going to have that column is going to be super wide because it has to accommodate all those extra zeros. So if you have it formatted dynamically, you can basically tell it, yeah, 12 or 12B for billion. So keeps things a little bit more tidy. So keep going here. Okay, yeah. The types of functions and things that you'll find in DAX: variables, iterators, table filtering, windowing, information. All right. So variables is where you declare a variable in a function or in a DAX measure, where you're saying, hey, I'm going to have a value here. I'm declaring this value. It can be a static value where you're saying, I'm going to keep using this value over and over again here. I don't want to have to keep typing it in every time, or I want to be able to come back and change it later I only change it in one place. Iterator is something like, this is the functions that end in X. So like average X, sum X, those are iterators. And what it's doing is it's actually going to every single row in the table and it's running that calculation at that level and then summarizing it all. Table filtering is where you're basically saying, hey, in this context, I want to filter this table so that it does something a little bit different. When we run the calculation, I want it to only show the calculation with the assumption that these tables here have been filtered down to only contain these values. So you get subsets of your data that way. Window functions. This is actually something that's has a very close kinship with SQL, where you have the ability to sort of break down your table of data and actually do like clustering in that table, and to look at each group within that and do summarization over that group. For instance, like if you want to do ranking, say, all right, I want to see the top, the top 5 categories per in sales per region or something like that. That's the kind of thing you would use a window function for. All right, and yeah, here's the ones you're going to want to use a lot for that sort of thing: selected value, if has one value, remove filters, that sort of stuff. All right. Incremental refresh, large models, and performance. All right, so this is where another reason why you're probably not going to need direct query most of the time is because you can, even if you have a really large data source, as long as the data itself isn't too big to fit in the model, if the problem is mainly that it takes too long to refresh, if you implement incremental refresh, it basically says, okay, just store the historical data and keep it there all the time. The only thing we want to actually refresh when we do the data refresh is just get the latest data that hasn't changed, because normally historical data isn't going to be changed. You can say, all right, well, if the data is older than, say, a month, we know for sure that nobody's going to go back and correct that data. You can just say, all right, cool. So everything that's before that point, we're just going to keep that imported. You're telling it to only go in and grab the data from between that cutoff point and today. So that's a much smaller amount of data for it to pull in. And so you can reduce something that used to take hours to refresh down to a few minutes, because you're only refreshing just the latest data. Because there's no point in refreshing all that old data that hasn't changed anyway. So why would you refresh it? Make sense? So you also have this whole concept of large models. This actually gets into this really technical stuff under the hood that's really not worth knowing why it works or how it works. Just know that if you have a model that gets to be pretty big, you'll need to switch it over to this large storage format. And there are some limitations about what can be done with large format models and what can and can't. So just be aware that it's basically one of those things where Microsoft started off with a specific model type, and then data models started getting really, really big, and they started getting awkward. And Microsoft's like, well, we need to fix this. I guess we'll just come up with a new model type and just make it so that people have to switch from one to the other if things get too out of hand. So just know that may end up happening to you at some point. If your data gets really, really big, you may have to switch over to the large format, and just know that will impose some restrictions on you. I think it's like you can't migrate a semantic model from one place to another if it's in the large storage format. So a few things like that to be aware of. All right, we're almost done here. So this is the what I call the miss list. So like, just screenshot of this if you're not going to get the slides at all. Just take a screenshot of this. This is like your little like the things that you are likely to be like gotchas. So I won't go into specifics on every one of them here, but I'll leave this up for a little bit here. And let's see if there's any other questions here. Would be wise to pop open the DAX page in Microsoft Learn while taking the test. Oh yeah. So when you have Microsoft Learn open in the exam, you're allowed to do that whenever you want. But I will say that it's like this is kind of timely. In the Odyssey, you've got the sirens, right? Like, and the Odysseus is sailing past the sirens. He's got to be tied to the mast to make sure that he can't try to like jump out of the boat and swim towards him or anything like that. You have to be careful about having Microsoft Learn open, because it's going to tempt you to go, oh, I'll just go look everything up. And the thing is, you don't have enough time to look everything up. You only have enough time to look up the things you definitely don't know, and there's no chance that you're going to be able to work it out yourself. So I would say don't just open it to have it there. Open it only if it's like, okay, I have no idea what this is. I need to go look it up, and I have a reasonable belief that I know where to find the information, or I know the term that I need to search to find it. That's where you use Microsoft Learn. I think it's kind of like an open book test. You don't want to just have the book open all the time and be flipping around from page to page, because there's just not enough time to find everything that way. You'll end up running out of time in the exam if you do that. So, but yeah, I mean, use it. Like, if you don't know the answer to something, definitely use it. Oh, this is another thing. So there are multiple points in the exam where you cannot go back and answer something that you left from earlier. One of those points is when you switch from the multiple choice questions where it's just a question, multiple choice, and then there's a section at the end of the exam where it's like these are case studies where there's multiple parts to a same question, but it all has to do with the same sort of like pretend scenario of, you've got this organization, they have these criteria. What solution would you recommend for them? That kind of thing. The dividing line between those two things, if you get to that case study part and you have questions that you've left for later, if you move past that line, the questions that you left for later, you can't go back and answer them anymore. Same thing happens if you take a bathroom break during the middle of the exam. If you do that, you cannot go back and answer something that you had left for later before your bathroom break. So just be cognizant of all that stuff. I guess we can talk a little bit about what's likely to happen if you're taking a proctored exam at home. The rules from Pearson VUE are just super strict. They will make you take a picture facing all 4 directions in the room to make sure that there's nothing around you. They'll have you have your webcam on the entire time. They're going to use eye tracking to make sure you're always looking at the screen. If you look down far enough where they think you might be able to look at your phone, that could, they'll probably warn you maybe once, but you got to be really careful to not give any sort of appearance that you're referencing outside material. They're also going to be watching your lips to make sure that you're not speaking at all, because the suspicion is that you're talking to someone who is then reading the answers to you. So even if you're the kind of person who likes to read the question aloud to yourself while you're going, do not move your mouth while you're reading aloud. Just, if you have to, just kind of say it inside your mouth without moving your lips. Like, hopefully you can just read it silently, but yeah, they're very, very strict on that kind of stuff. And so it's a little easier. It feels a little bit less big brothery to go take the exam at a Pearson VUE testing center, but they don't have those everywhere. So another thing to keep in mind is that they will make you install software on your machine to take the exam. And if you don't have local administrator on your machine, you're not going to be able to install the software. So if you're working at an organization where they have that full control over your machine, they don't let you install things, you're probably going to have to take the exam on a personal computer. And that app does a whole lot of monitoring other stuff. And there's a whole lot of types of apps where it says you can't even have that app installed on here at the same time when you're trying to take the exam, because it doesn't want you to have that kind of other software on there. So again, very, very, very strict. And it has to be a physical computer too. It can't be a virtual machine. Their software will detect if it's running on a virtual machine. So just know that there's a lot of stuff that they're going to, if you try to take it at home, which I've done for most of mine. It's just all the stuff you're going to, and they'll make you aware of all these things ahead of time. It's not like you have to know all of them going in. It's all very well documented. So, yeah, here we're on the very last page here. We're like, I guess we're a little bit over on time, aren't we? Any last questions from anyone? Great. Wow. Yep. Recording's going to be up on YouTube. Jeff, do you think I'll be later today?
Yep, later today.
Right.
I'll have it up there.
Great. Cool. Thank you everyone for coming. And I think what I'll do probably is I'll get this slide deck compiled into a PDF, and then we can throw that up on Google Drive, right? And then we'll put a link to that in the description on YouTube. That way, if you want a copy, you can grab it from there. So thank you everyone for coming to my TED Talk today. I'm really glad that you're all here, because this is a great way to bridge the gap between Power BI and Fabric. I think a lot of people who've started in Power BI are really itching to like expand their skill set, and Fabric is just this enormous field of cool things to get your get up to your elbows in. And I think this exam is a great way to kind of expose you to some of that stuff and go, wow, I didn't even know that KQL existed. I'm going to learn about real-time data now. So I'm so glad that you're all here and getting into this, and I hope that you find this instructive and that you all pass your exam. Oh, and then do we have links to? Oh no, that's right. You shared the link earlier for the voucher, right?
Let me do it again though, just
Yep.
since we're all here. Yep.
So one thing that you will probably see on here is that that it's going to ask you to list 2 sessions that you've attended. Now, if you've attended this one, you've attended 1. We've done already a session where we did a sort of a summary of all the PL300 and DP-600 stuff. So we kind of like did a very surface level overview on those. So if you attended that one and this one, then that gets you the 2. If you didn't attend that one and if you attended this one, we also have I think we did a PL300 one, just PL300 the other day, and I think we have a second PL300.
Yep.
Is that tomorrow?
Tomorrow. Yep.
So if you need to get 2 of them, you can attend that one. The other thing is, there's nothing that says you have to only attend our stuff. There's also these, I think there's usually like live stream stuff that they're doing that Microsoft officially hosts themselves. There's also, of course, other user groups that are hosting these things. So like there's just stuff all the time. So if you can't make the one tomorrow and you didn't make any of the ones earlier, don't worry. This is not your only chance. Just find another one that you can attend if you haven't already attended one earlier, and then that will satisfy that criteria. They also do want you to have taken and gone through and passed all of the they call the Microsoft Learn modules in Microsoft Learn. They're pretty easy to go through. I don't think that there's anything that's going to actually they're deceptively simple. Don't use the difficulty level of the learning modules in Microsoft Learn as a gauge to tell you whether you're going to do well on the exam. Use the practice exams to tell you whether you're going to do well on the exam. And even that, I think the practice exams are a little bit easier than what you experience in the real exam. So I think if you can pass the practice exams with a 900 or so, then you're likely to pass the real exam with a 700 or better. So that's how I'd recommend taking that approach. Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you
you,
all.
James.
This has been a lot of fun, and I hope to see you all later.
Thanks, James.
Yep.
Talk soon. Bye, everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, James. Bye.